just amazing to me. Turning over a new leaf, surrendering to God, and letting His will be done in my life has showed me so many things and gave me so many opportunities. I was working 2 or 3 jobs back in 1997 and 98 and was doing okay, was married to a lady, and we had addiction problems and everything, and it got so bad to where she would go up missing or come out missing for weeks at a time, and it really got me bothered. And so one day I went looking for her, and where I found her wasn't a good spot and a good place, and it caused me to lose my temper and run up in there and cause a lot of havoc in my life. And due to that, I wound up in jail and was facing some prison time, and got caught for DWI along the way with that. So the sheriff of that county gave me an option to leave that county and never come back, but and he'd have all the other charges dropped, which at the time I felt like my marriage was over anyway. And so I had a DWI. He said I was going to have to own up to that DWI, and everything else he'd get took care of. And so I was on probation. They got the probation transferred to Guilford County area, Greensboro, North Carolina. And so I moved here to Greensboro, and I worked 2 or 3 more jobs while I was on probation to pay off fines and stuff like that I'd occurred during the trouble. And so I got all that paid off, and during this time, my wife's family always found me through my Social Security number where I was working, and they would show up on my jobs bringing her, trying to get me to go back with her, and I didn't want that life anymore. I was through. And so whenever I got all my fines paid off and everything, my probation officer cut me loose. So I decided that I was going to go live on the streets, and either they would kill me or I would survive and they would make me. And so that was in the year 2000. And so for the next 12 years, I lived on the streets. I didn't want to leave the area, so I moved out to the woods, met some Latino people from all over the world, and they became my family, and we made a camp and built a hut, and I lived in the woods for the next 12 years. Up until the year 2008 and 9, whenever they was surveying to bring a greenway through downtown Greensboro, and they was surveying right through our camp. And I always said they tore down Paradise and put up a parking lot. And I just say that jokingly, because really, with them finding us, met several ministries that did outreach for homeless people that way, and they continued to work with me.
We were feeding many homeless people on the street corners of downtown Greensboro. And the last stop of the night, we went down to where the Freeman Mill Road Bridge crosses over Spring Garden Street. And it was a nice group down there, probably about 15 or 20 people. And I noticed there was one tall, dark, shady figure under the street light, kind of off to himself. And I went over to him and I said, "Hey, do you want to get in line and get some food?" He's like, "Nah, I'm good, I'll let everybody else go first." And I said, "Well, my name's Kevin, what's yours?" And he said, "They call me Chief." One December morning, it was cold and wet. We went down actually to the Freeman Mill camp and was taking food and supplies to the people down there. And there's Mark sitting on a bucket for the first time. He's like, "Hey, Rev." I was first year in college, and he just remembered and knew. So he's like, "Pull up a bucket." And the bucket I was gonna sit on was just muddy and everything. He's like, here, have mine. He's like, you can have mine. And he started like moving wood around and stuff just to make it look like he was, didn't need a seat or anything. But that was my first true sit down experience with Mark. With Mark, I mean, he was always eager to know more, and would ask me questions and would ask to come to church, would call me in the middle of the night and talk to me and ask for prayer. I started going out to churches and saying, hey, we're starting this new ministry. It may sound crazy. We're meeting outside, downtown Greensboro, under a bridge. And I mean, you would think I was selling people mud. They were like, I don't think that's something we want to get involved with. I'm like, okay, no problem. So we decided to have a preview service to see what that would look like. Well, no one really showed up. Even our homeless friends didn't show up. So we had all this food, so we had to package up again and go distribute it again. So we did all that, and we didn't lose focus. We're like, we're still gonna do this. So a month later, we had our first initial service, and over 150 people showed up. In the first month or so we were doing this, we were the only church doing it, or organization. And then people started seeing us walking on the street and doing this, and they were asking questions. And then it was on the internet, it was on Facebook, it was on all this other stuff. People started noticing. We had a TV crew come out, and so the word got out. So Mark was not even a quarter mile away from that bridge in his campsite. So him and his friends could walk up to and be served and be part of that ministry. Mark went into a rehab center in High Point. The name is escaping me right now, but as his first round. And we visited him on Sundays, the 16 Cent Ministry Gang. Sometimes not all of us could go, but we'd visit him and talk to him and everything. But we wanted to keep that experience alive. We wanted to keep that bridge going. We didn't want him to say, okay, you're on your own now. We want to have that experience with him. So he started doing that and was on a good path, and then he would decide it's just easier on the streets. I once saw Mark give his jacket to somebody, and he's like, well, I'll get another one. But with Mark, his giving spirit, the way he protected and treated people, I saw that on a regular basis, because there's women out on the streets, and he would stand up for those folks. And he would actually take a punch or two for people if need be. He emulated Christ to me in a way that I don't even think he recognized at that point in time. So he went back to rehab, and we had a good group. At that point, between everything, we had a better group of support in the system. Then he went to caring services, and then he ended up at caring services for quite some time, and was doing very well.
God started opening up my heart to bigger and better things within me, to know that I was his child and that things could change if I would just believe in him and let his will be done and not mine. And so through a process of 2 or 3 years of doing this, finally in the year of July the 2nd of 2012, I threw up my hands and surrendered to God that his will be done and not mine. And I went into a treatment program, And from that day on, I let God's will be done.
I met Mark in 2013. I started going to church under the bridge. I had never really been exposed to homeless people or people living on the street before, and it was just a new and interesting experience for me. It was at church under the bridge where I saw him several times.
So Mark, being part of our ministry and being part of Street Watch and Naaman's and having his, I guess, transformation from the streets to sobriety and all this with Naaman's Recovery Village, at times he would speak in front of church under the bridge.
Sitting still, waiting for somebody to do it for you is not going to work. You got to get out and do the footwork and make things happen, and that's what I did with God's grace and mercy. All the time, it's always with God's grace and mercy, because I would pray. Sometimes I would be in prayer all day long, just going through a daily routine. You know, I would constantly be in prayer for something, you know, just to help me do this or to survive this. Give yourself a chance.
We were taking care of them through, I guess, nutrition and everything, but Mark was challenging them in a spiritual way to say, hey, God's got something better for you than right here. So Mark was really challenging them every time he spoke in front of a crowd. Even if it was to fundraise for something, he would always be challenging them to say, hey, God has done this for me. He always gave credit to God. He never said, hey, give this ministry to me, or do this, or give to this ministry because I'm speaking. It wasn't about that. It was like, do this because God is changing people's lives in the city.
So we started doing homeless ministry together. And, you know, when you're almost 70 years old and you're going through the woods, you ask the Lord, what in the world, Lord, are you having me do this for? I understand this, but Mark was a good partner. He helped me climb over logs. He helped me find a place to sit or a tree to lean up against or something. So we were really good ministry partners.
It was quite incredible to watch his transformation. I know, you know, everybody knows kids go to camp and kids go to youth camp and come back transformed, and then they go back to school, and it's that constant back and forth. But eventually, sometimes that sticks. And not to put Mark in that same situation, but it finally stuck with Mark. He finally said, this is it. I remember him going around with the Caring Village, and he had a little motor scooter, and he would still take waters and food to people on his little motor scooter. There's pictures of that everywhere. But I won't say it was us. I really feel like it was like God just drawing him closer to say, hey, you just need to keep on giving back every step that you keep going. This path is long, the journey is gonna be long. You need to keep telling your story to as many people as possible. So he'd get on his little scooter and go. He got in his Explorer and went. He got in his Ford Edge and went. The man never sat still. He was always out there doing something, speaking to somebody, accepting an award, raising money for these people, taking people to detox, taking people to, I mean, he was everywhere.
Craig Robertson was the executive director of Naaman's Recovery Village, and he wanted Mark to become the executive director of Naaman's Recovery Village. And Mark said, Craig, do you understand that I am an alcoholic? I am just not completely finished the recovery program myself. I have a job. Will I be able to do that? Do you know who you're talking to? And Craig said, I've been watching you on Facebook, and from what I have seen, you are the person that we need. And Mark said, well, I'm going to have to pray about that. And Craig said, that's the answer I wanted to hear. And he said, I've got one more thing to tell you, Mark. We can't pay you, because Naaman's was ready to go under. And so in order to for them to survive, Mark would step in as the executive director, and they would give him housing and food. The room and board is all that he would get. So we talked a lot that week, trying to decide what he should do, and he did decide to go ahead and take it. He said God told him that that's what he should do. So he did, and he stayed there 2 years, and he really turned that whole thing around, because in less than a year they were out of the red into the black. They had met their bills through a lot of prayer and different connections. They had a new roof put on that house. Just many things happened. New mattresses for all of the beds, bedding for the beds, and all of those many wonderful things that just kept happening and kept happening. The men worked, and they began to feel good about themselves too, because they were being a part of this process. But at the end of the 2 years, when Mark felt like it was messing with his sobriety, he always said, I need to start my own business. I've always wanted to be my own boss. I want to start a pressure washing business and a lawn care business. And he said, so I'm leaving Naaman's, and that's it. And I said, well, where are you going to live? He said, oh, I never did get rid of my tent when actually he held on to that tent and that sleeping bag forever. He said, I will just find a place in the woods and I will stay there until I build my business up. Well, I had known Mark for several years at that point, and I had a 3-bedroom house. And I prayed and prayed and prayed, and I think the Lord told me to open up my house to him, that he could have a room there. I knew that people were taken advantage of, but I also felt like I knew Mark, and it's like I explained to him, when God tells you to do something, you've got to do that. Well, eventually Mark did have a room in my house. The interesting thing too is that his phone would ring in the middle of the night, and he would come and knock on my door just to tell me that he was leaving. I've got to go. And he would go to somebody out on the street that was ready to take their life, was ready to drink again, was ready to drug again. But they knew Mark, and they knew enough. And so he spent time back at Naaman's. He spent time in other places, wherever these folks were. And then I would really worry, just like a mother, because Mark was old enough to be young enough to be my child. He was 15 years younger than I was. So I did kind of worry about that. But he ministered to these people all the time. But even when Mark was diagnosed with cancer, I've got this beautiful picture in my home of our church laying hands on him. And to me, that picture is the essence of what the church is. People who were praying for Mark, and Mark was saying, I am going to be healed. I don't know if it will be this side of heaven or the other side of heaven, but I will be healed. And he just, as much pain and suffering as he went through his last few months, he never gave up his hope. He never turned to alcohol again. He stayed on the road that God had given him, that path that was so important. And it was all because of God. And now he's in heaven, he's whole. And I praise God for that, and I praise God for the wonderful, wonderful time that we had as friends.
It's a powerful statement to say that he finished strong. He didn't say, okay, I'm on easy street. He finished strong. And as many people could say, and I don't want to take anybody's thunder away from anybody, no matter what he went through at the end of his life, he can say that he finished strong and didn't fall back. He stayed the course of sobriety and finished at the end. And I think that's the most amazing thing. I can't imagine the pain that Mark went through. I heard it, I experienced seeing it, but he never gave up. He never gave up on his faith in Christ. He was just a great, incredible man, and I'm just blessed to know him and be part of his story. And I don't want his story to stop.
All the things that I could tell you whenever I surrendered to God and let his will be done in my life, the opportunities, the doors that's opened, the gifts that I've received.
I've always said this, if all the churches right here in just the Guilford County area of Greensboro would take one homeless person into their congregation and work with that homeless person for, say, a year or two, do everything that needs to be done, whether it be doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, mental health appointments or whatever, and get them into housing, that would help end the homeless population around here.